We're back here on the Greg Peterson Experience on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, being joined by David Baker, a professional poker player and a man that won the 2020 Westgate SuperContest. And David, always appreciate the time that you give me every single Sunday. Thank you so much for joining me in studio tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I know games today were exciting and a lot of great play and a lot of awful play. And so let's get at it. Let's talk about some of these games and what were they doing out there?
Yes, I think that this needs to be sort of used a Seinfeld reference, the airing of grievances with some of what we saw in terms of Sunday. As I know you had some strong thoughts in terms of what we see in terms of situational play. And I think one of the trickiest things to do, regardless of the sport that you're handicapping, the NFL, college basketball, the NBA, you're able to go down the line. And it is a case of which, with some of the situational play, some of the decisions made were honestly very, very good. And I know that we were talking about this with a team that got away with it, like the Ravens, for instance, kicking the field goal on 4th and a half a yard. It was just mind-numbingly bad, and I do think that it's very hard to quantify, but something that decides a lot of these games.
Yeah, I think today, I think we're probably going to run through a lot of these games individually, and we can kind of attack them all when they get here. But I really think some of these coaches, they do a great job preparing their team and things for the play, but the situational preparation of these teams is either lacking or they're just very bad at it because the situational play and decision making by the coaches and the quarterbacking. I can just name Brissett, Wentz. Even I didn't like what Baltimore did. What Kyler Murray. There was just abysmal decision making from the coaches and the quarterbacks at the end of these football games, and it even started Thursday night. Russell Wilson, they're up 3. All they have to do is make a first down, and they end the game. And instead of them running a 4-yard play, he runs a 25-yard pass play into the end zone, gets it picked off, and subsequently loses the game because of it. Where the only way they guaranteed to win the game was to get 4 yards, get the first down. So run a safer pattern, get the first down, end the football game. Instead, they took a needless shot at the end zone. So I think the situational play is really, really bad in the NFL right now. And, that's why you have got teams like the Patriots and things that they've kind of hung around enough. Maybe they're able to hang around long enough and let some of these coaches make mistakes where, Bill Belichick has always had his team prepared. So.
And what I think is interesting as well is you bring up that Broncos versus Colts game from Thursday, and I know that we're taking so much of a look at Sunday, but I think that that's a prime example, a guy like Russell Wilson, because while he was with the Seattle Seahawks, it felt like he never made those decisions. And I think a lot of it does have to come back to Nathaniel Hackett, because one thing that I think has been a hot-button topic is when it comes to ordeals like this, do you blame Nathaniel Hackett more? Do you blame Russell Wilson more? And I do think that the answer is somewhere in between. You can't put 100% of the blame on Russell Wilson. You can't put 100% of the blame on Nathaniel Hackett. It's essentially a garbage situation in which both are adding their trash to the big giant dumpster fire. But I do think that is something to take a look at, because I do think that there needs to be some blame assigned to what is happening. And sometimes I think that it might be just the collective of the coach and the quarterback that are both making bad decisions.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a battle of which coach is going and which coach-quarterback combination is going to just end up on the wrong side of variance because they're both making errors. This Charger-Brown game, for instance, Staley makes a decision to go for it from his own 40-yard line where essentially he's saying that he has more confidence. And, I appreciate that he has more confidence in his offense to make 2 yards. But the reality is if he punts the ball, you're probably going to give the ball to Jacoby Brissett at the 15-yard line with a minute left. And instead, he wanted to kind of prove, my offense is the best, and I'm going to just go ahead and win this game right here, where it did not feel like a wise decision at the time. Sure enough, they stopped him. But before that, Jacoby Brissett just gives the game away. They're down 2. They have 3rd and 7, and he tries to fit it into a tight window instead of you have to run a safer play there, or, he was rolling out. He really could have tried to run for the first down, maybe the touchdown, and at least get the field goal, go up, and win the game. But instead, he tried to force it in there. You had Carson Wentz try to force the ball in there, couldn't score from the 3-yard line. I just thought there was a lot of really poor play at the end of these football games. And I guess that's why, the big-time quarterbacks, like Mahomes and Allen and Lamar and things like that, that's why they get the big money, because, they're not making these mistakes, and that's why we don't like the players like Wentz and Brissett and things like that overall.
And perhaps that's why we've seen nearly 60% of games this season go under the total as well. And we're talking about coaching, and obviously this is one of the better coaches in the NFL, but I'm noticing that there are some of these teams that we could just sort of rule them into that bottom tier of the NFL. And now we're able to have takeaways that, oh yeah, the 1-4 of this team, it is warranted, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously, Mike Tomlin, one of the best coaches in the NFL, but this Pittsburgh Steelers team, in terms of talent and talent alone, they might be the worst team in the NFL. I don't know if you've got pushback. I don't know if you've got a different team that you might put into this fold, but I just took a look at the Pittsburgh Steelers today, and there's just absolutely no weapons on this team, pretty much on either side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to take too much from this game. I mean, the Bills are, we've talked about it every week. They're the best team in the NFL. Yeah, I mean, they just got in there and they gave up that 100-yard play, 98-yard play to start the game, and their backs were against the wall. They have a rookie quarterback, and up against this offense, they get down. They really can't do anything. But one thing that I've really noticed is I'm not sure if this year is different than years past, but the offensive lines have really – the teams that don't have strong offensive lines have really, really struggled. And I think you're seeing that with Pittsburgh. I'm not sure if this year is different than years past, but I'm really noticing it this year that quarterbacks just aren't really having the time to stand in the pocket and deliver. I mean, you saw it most recently with the last game that we watched. I mean,
the Bengals.
Joe Burrow just week in, week out, we think that he's going to get it right. He's got the weapons. We think that he's elite. He's got an elite running back. He's got elite wide receivers. And week after week, he's just under so much pressure that he just doesn't have time to deliver. His receivers don't have time to get the separation. So, I mean, you see that. You see Carson Wentz get just blown up because his offensive line is terrible. When he had a little bit of time back there, he looked okay, but he just doesn't respond well when the pressure's on him. Matt Stafford got absolutely blown up.
I was about to bring up the Rams as well, because that's the one thing that I noticed. Ever since Andre Whitworth has retired, this Rams offense has not looked the same.
Yeah, and last week when we sat here and we previewed the next week's games, I said immediately Dallas was going to be my favorite play this week, and sure enough, I hope everybody got on that. That seemed like the easiest play to me. I thought that they should have been favored. I mean, the NFL is one in the trenches. Unless you have just that absolute elite quarterback and weapons, which the Rams do not. I know people want to put Stafford as elite, but he is not. He is not Mahomes. He is not Allen. He is not Brady with time. He's not Rodgers with time. He's Matt Stafford, and he won the Super Bowl, and congratulations. But I was never ready to anoint Matt Stafford to the Hall of Fame or put him in that upper echelon of quarterbacks. And I think we're seeing it now with no offensive line. He has no time. He has one weapon. And when you can get pressure on these quarterbacks, it just doesn't matter. They're stuck. And I think we're going to continue to see the teams like Philly and Dallas and Buffalo and San Francisco and the teams with the elite lines dominate the NFL. And I'm not sure if we're just at a shortage of offensive linemen and maybe we're going through a cycle or what the situation is, but I felt like the offensive line play in general in the NFL has really been down. And I think that's maybe why you're seeing more unders. You're seeing more teams fail in the red zone. You're seeing a lot of sacks. You're seeing a lot of just a lot of poor offense. And I think that it all starts with the offensive line.
And I do think that the offensive line does bear itself out in terms of the offensive numbers that we see in general, in terms of like yards per carry with a guy like a Najee Harris. But I do think that is such a good point. One thing that I know that we really highlighted last offseason, which is why a lot of people were bearish on the Pittsburgh Steelers was that they didn't address that offensive line. They really didn't do it this offseason. Now things have went from going down a little bit to way, way down with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I am in agreement with you there. And we've been talking about a lot of the disappointments with our good friend David Baker, the 2020 Westgate SuperContest champion. Now I need to get his thoughts on a pair of surprising 4-1 teams next here on the Greg Peterson Experience on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. We're back here on the Greg Peterson Experience on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, being rejoined by 2020 Westgate SuperContest champion David Baker. And David, we talked a little bit about the bad last segment. We were able to air out some of our grievances. Now let's take a look at the surprisingly good, and let's go to the team that they won across the pond today, the New York Giants. They get it done against the Green Bay Packers. Was looking a little bit grim in the first half. They come back from down 2 scores, and with the Giants, I still do think that this 4-1 record, a little bit of fool's gold, but I'm coming around on this team, and we mentioned it last segment with coaching and how much it should mean with a lot of these teams and how bad some of the coaching is. I take a look at the Giants, and coaching has been very good, and the offensive line has really been able to open up holes for Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the Giants is a little fool's gold. I really do like Brian Daboll. I think that he was the best candidate that's been up in the last several years, and I was surprised he didn't get a job last year, and I think New York got themselves a gem. I think he is going to build a winner there, but I don't think it's this year. I do think that, they've benefited from a somewhat easy schedule to start the season. And they're just wrecked with injuries. You just can't win consistently in the NFL when your wide receiver one last week it was Richie James. This week it's Darius Slayton. The week before it was Sterling Shepard, who's out for the year. I mean, you're basically talking about a wide receiver core that wouldn't be on the field. None of these guys would be on the field on about 28 other teams in the NFL. So it's a nice story. I like Daboll, and I've always kind of thought Daniel Jones was a little bit underrated. And Saquon, if he can stay healthy, he's good. But I'm not really going to look for them to be in contention for anything other than maybe a 500 record. On the other side of this football game, I mean, let's talk about the Packers and another head-scratching coaching decision. I'm watching the end of this game, and Green Bay is driving for the go-ahead score. They're in the red zone, and their best offensive weapon, Aaron Jones, isn't on the field. And I'm really, why is your best weapon not on the field in the most important part of the game? I'm just really not sure what is going on with some of the coaching and some of the coaching decisions. You got an excellent effort out of Cobb, and Rodgers was okay, and yet then you get down here in the crunch time, and the one guy who always has a nose for the end zone is Aaron Jones. I've always really liked that guy and always felt that he was good, and it just wasn't his series, or they didn't call his play calls. Like, this guy's got to be in the football game. And if I'm a Packer fan, like that's my major question is, where's Aaron Jones when the game's on the line? Either running patterns, taking handoffs, disguising, whatever. He needs to be out there. So I'm down on the Giants, and again, like we talked about last week, again this week, they're just laying too high in numbers out there for the Packers. The Packers don't have receivers that are capable of covering almost double-digit lines. So, yeah, I'm just going to be continuing to look to fade them like we did 2 weeks ago with the Patriots, this week with the Giants, next week with the Jets. Similar situation. They're laying over a touchdown again. Probably be looking to take the points again. This Green Bay team's not built to blow people out right now.
I'm in total agreement with you. I think that this is a Packers team that they're a little bit more defense-oriented. Now, the defensive effort this week against the New York Giants, I would say it's lackluster because, to your point, this is a receiving core for the Giants that's not so great, but I mean, it was the Packers' wide receiving core too much better. I mean, you had Randall Cobb, who you mentioned. He's like 87 years old. He led the team with 7 receptions for 99 yards. This is not a receiving core that itself is very good. Aaron Rodgers, he does a solid job of being able to make these guys look a little bit better. But I do think that with the Packers, to your point, as long as they're continuing to lay a touchdown like they have been the last few days, aside from when they're playing against the Chicago Bears, I really can't take a look at the Packers at this high of a number.
Yeah, I mean, Devontae Adams, people have long thought that receivers were replaceable, and you saw a lot of receiver movement of some of these top guys with, Hill and Adams, and some of these receivers are make these quarterbacks. At the end of the day, will Dobbs or
Lazard.
or Lazard or Watson step up and be the go-to guy? I don't know, but I do know that they had one in Adams, and he sure did make Rodgers look good the last couple of years. And I mean, I think this Packers team's probably undefeated right now if they have Adams, and now they're 3-2 and staring up at a team that I know we both like in the Minnesota Vikings up at the top of that division.
Absolutely. And then I do think that this is something interesting as well, because we're talking about so many of these coaches as well. And we always hear the theory of, can a player turn the corner? Do you feel like a coach can turn the corner? Because speaking of the Green Bay Packers, Mike McCarthy was doing a solid job with the Packers during the early part of his coaching tenure there. Things went very stale. They had to move on, and I thought that it was the right decision to can Mike McCarthy a few years ago. I take a look at what Mike McCarthy has done with the Dallas Cowboys, and I would argue that this is currently his finest coaching hour, because even with Cooper Rush in there, they've been able to run off 4 straight wins, and it feels like the Cowboys aren't making as many boneheaded decisions as they did last year with regards to clock management. They haven't been in as many of those situations this season, but I take a look at the Cowboys, and a big reason why they've been able to do a solid job is that I feel like Mike McCarthy has done a much better job this year than he has done in the past.
Yeah, I mean, we want to assign a ranking to these coaches and quarterbacks, and we just want to stick with it. But the reality is, just like all of us in our jobs, we're going to get better on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and some of us are going to improve by leaps and bounds over those years, and sometimes you can stay stagnant at the time, and then something clicks. Maybe something clicked with him, or maybe he's just got an elite defense, and maybe he has, benefited from, a semi-easy schedule. And look, they went into LA and they took care of business, and that was a game that I thought that they would. But I really just don't think the Rams are very good, period. So I'm going to take away that the Cowboys are kind of who I thought they were, that they are, stepping up to that really good class in the NFL. I'm going to put them in that second tier with the Niners and,
Minnesota?
Maybe Minnesota, maybe Green Bay. And even though I know neither of us are that high in Green Bay, but I think Dallas has escalated to that. And then they're going to get Dak back. But this big test this week with the Eagles, if I had to rank the NFC teams right now, I would say the best 3 NFC teams are the Eagles, the Cowboys, and the Niners. So we're going to match up with what I think are 2 of the 3 best teams in the NFC.
Yep, and 2 teams are excluded from that, the Green Bay Packers, and then also the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who they got the win, and I'm sure that many people are in agreement with me. They got the win in very cheap fashion. That blown call that they were saying that I think the refs said after the game that they threw down Tom Brady, and that's just him trying to make some sort of a excuse for a really, really bad call. But I mean, my takeaway from Buccaneers versus Falcons is this is still a Falcons team that, as long as they're catching a touchdown like they were against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you know what? You could bet on the Falcons. They're a scrappy team. They're not going to win a ton of games outright, in my opinion. But you know what? They're sort of like the Lions of last season, a team that's able to cover the spread. And for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, until they get guys back, you really can't be laying points with this team.
Yeah, my takeaway from this game is just that the Bucs kind of put it on cruise control. I mean, they were up 21-0, and I don't know if they just kind of stopped or what. I mean, I laid the points in this game, and I kind of checked out of that game. It just seemed like it was done. Atlanta couldn't do anything. Tampa had 21 points, and before we knew it, this was a football game. I mean, obviously the call was questionable at best. But, I mean, I have seen that before when a big defensive guy takes the quarterback and literally picks him up and slams him to the ground. They're trying to protect their quarterbacks. And, look, you might not like it. A lot of fans might not like it. But at the end of the day, I'm tired of seeing bad quarterbacking. And if we need to have these penalties to protect the few good quarterbacks we have in the league, then that's fine. I mean, I don't even know what we saw in Miami with this third string quarterback that had never thrown a ball before. I don't need to see that. I want to see Tom Brady. I want to see Aaron Rodgers. I want to see, I want to see these quarterbacks that can read defenses and make passes. I don't really want to watch this. So if the trade-off is a penalty to stop, those strong hits, that's fine with me. I'm going to take that. Call me a Brady stan if you want, but
we shall see if we're going to be seeing that more of that moving forward. But what we do know is that we've got some Week 6 lines out. We're going to be touching upon those next with David Baker here on VSiN, Esports Betting Network. Being rejoined by David Baker, the 2020 Westgate SuperContest champion. And David, we've taken a look at all that we got in terms of Week 5, and there is one more Week 5 game. Did you have much of a take for Monday Night Football between the Chiefs and the Raiders?
I'm still trying to figure this one out. I mean, I want to take the points and play the Raiders. I like the Raiders team. I think that they're growing. They're feisty, and I like the weapons they have offensively. But I'm not sure that they can hang like that. This is the spot for them. I mean, that Kansas City home field is really strong, and Patrick Mahomes just loves throwing against these jerseys. I mean, I know McDaniels is going to have a little different wrinkle defensively than what he's used to seeing in the past, but Mahomes has carved this team up in years past. So I'm not really sure. I know this is not going to be a big play for me for sure. So, I'm leaning Raiders now, but I think that's just me wanting to like the Raiders.
And I personally take a look at the over as well. I don't know how much you make out of something like this, but something that I noticed with the Kansas City Chiefs is just year in and year out, the first 5, 6 or so weeks of the season, the defense is really bad. We saw that last year where they were historically bad through the first 5 weeks, and then they improve as the season goes along. And I do think that there's a little bit of credence with that because it's sort of like the opposite of what we've seen with the Arizona Cardinals, where the last few years they are super warm at the beginning of the season, and the Cardinals go straight down the toilet bowl. Perhaps it'll be a little bit different this year. Do you make a little bit out of that where we do see some of these teams like a Chiefs defense get better as the season goes along and vice versa, the Cardinals where they just begin the season typically strong and then they go straight downhill?
I kind of feel like the entire NFL, the defenses are all getting better every week. I mean, in the years past, we've just had shootout after shootout, and this year it doesn't really feel like that. I feel like points are more at a premium. So I'm going to start looking at trying to get some of these points in these lines because I don't, when totals are 56, laying 6 isn't nearly as painful as when the total's 42 or 44. And I think we're seeing at this year that points are a little harder to come by. So I'm going to be trying to find spots where we can go ahead and pick up the points because I think the defenses are a little better. And I think this Chiefs defense looked pretty darn good against the Bucs, at least for the first half. The second half, there was a lot of garbage time, so I'm going to take that out. But the first half, they looked pretty decent, I thought.
Yep, I do think that with the Chiefs defense, it's going to be interesting to see how they improve in the secondary because I do think that they needed a little bit of time to adjust to not having the Honey Badger back out there as well because he was a part of that defense. And what I do think is going to be intriguing for week number 6 is we're seeing a little bit of a look at line right now with the Minnesota Vikings being about a 3 to a 3.5 point favorite, mostly a 3-point favorite against the Miami Dolphins. What the Dolphins are going to be trotting out there at quarterback is going to be very intriguing, and I do think that this is a spot where if you don't have Tua out there, if you don't have Teddy Bridgewater out there, which I think right now needs to be the expectation, this should be a spot where the Minnesota Vikings should be able to take care of business and get to 5-1 and win this game. I'm not sure if you've got much of a take on this one as of right now because there is a lot of injury question when it comes to Miami Dolphins, but assuming that what happens with Bridgewater and Tua does happen where they're sidelined, I do think that the Vikings should be able to take care of business.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm going to agree with that take. I do like the Vikings in general. We've talked about every week that I'm pretty high on the Vikings. Traditionally, though, this is kind of a spot where Kirk kind of falls on his face traveling across the down to the south and having to play in Miami. I'm not sure what the heat's going to be like there. But it really just comes down to injuries. I think Teddy's probably going to play. I mean, from what it sounded like, they were just being overly cautious because of the Tua thing, I think. But he passed the tests in the locker room. But I guess the new thing is that if he's a little woozy, then they have to hold him out. But I think under old concussion protocol, he probably would have gone back in today. Hill didn't finish the game. Waddle was banged up going into it. So it's really tough to know with these weapons. I don't really have a strong lean at this point. I mean, I hope it's the Vikings. I have a lot of money tied up in Vikings futures. So I hope it's what you say, and I hope maybe we see a depleted Dolphins team because I would like to back the Vikings.
Yeah, because Teddy is going to be in concussion protocols, and literally within the last few days, we have seen those updated. So that is really going to put this one to the test because with the Miami Dolphins, they were the team that they really caused for a little bit of, shall we say, reconfiguration of those as well. So I do think that that is really going to be something to take a look at, not just from a betting perspective, but just from an overall football and how things are being handled perspective as well. We were talking about how bad it is to watch the Denver Broncos in prime time, and they're going to be back in prime time this Monday as well. But, well, at the very least, on Thursday night, we get a much better game between the Washington Commanders and the Chicago Bears, which, that is going to be a rough watch as well. But if I'm looking anywhere, I'd be looking at the Washington Commanders as a pick'em in this game. I just really can't trust in the Chicago Bears, a team that at 2-3, I think that they're significantly worse than their record would indicate. This is probably not a game that you want to be investing too much in my opinion. But if I were to look at a little bit of a road team that's a pick'em / an underdog, I think that the Commanders have a good shot of being able to get the job done against a Bears team that they just are being eluded by the forward pass at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to play, but I will play something because it's on TV and it's the NFL, and I'm going to watch it and I'm going to bet it because that's what I do. But who knows? Who knows what's going to happen with Washington? Is Wentz going to quarterback? Is Rivera going to coach? I don't know. I mean, we need to see how things shake out through the week. My initial indication would be, I think the Commanders are a little better team than the Bears, but I kind of want to see how this week shakes out. Just because the Commanders have a lot of issues. So let's just kind of see what happens. I'm not going to make a prediction on Thursday yet.
I gave you one of the worst games on the board there.
I appreciate that.
So we're going to give you a better one. Do you have anything in terms of the Cowboys versus the Eagles right now? Two teams that we are both very high on. The Eagles are between about a 5 to a 5.5 point favorite. Total is about a 43.5. And I do think that this is correlated a little bit in my opinion. If this is a game that is a big giant shootout, it bodes very well for the Philadelphia Eagles. If the Dallas Cowboys defense continues to play the way that it does, I do think that this lends itself to the Cowboys being able to cover this number.
Yeah, well, I mean, both these teams have feasted on teams that their line play is just significantly better than. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens now when they're matched with equally as good line play. So the Cowboys are able to really feast on bad offensive lines. The Eagles have probably one of the best offensive lines in football, so that takes away an advantage there. I want to see what happens with Dak. I think Dak's going to make his return in this game. If he does, and if that line stays north of a field goal, as much as I have preseason action on the Eagles to win this division, I might lean towards the Cowboys. I think over a field goal. I think this is a close game. And I don't really think there's a whole lot of difference between these teams right now. I mean, I know we want to think the Eagles are elite and the Cowboys are not, but from what I've seen, the Cowboys are pretty darn close. And the Eagles have really struggled scoring in the second half. And once it's okay and twice it's – but now we're going on 4 weeks in a row where they can't score in the second half. They didn't score past in the last 40 minutes of the game other than a couple of field goals against the Cardinals. And the Cardinals have – a pretty pathetic defense. So I'm not sure if we're crowning the Eagles a little quick. If we get Dak and this line stays over 4, I'm probably going to be looking to take the points in this one, as much to my dismay, because the Eagles could go ahead and probably salt that division away if they win this game. So.
Yep, and with regards to the Arizona Cardinals as well, they were dealing with not having James Conner in that game as well, so they had to go a little bit more one-dimensional, but we never go one-dimensional on this show as we give you pro tips every single hour on pretty much the entirety of the network. So you get 20 pro tips every single weekday here on VSiN. And the pro tip for this hour, we were talking about it with David Baker. don't be afraid to change your opinion a little bit on coaches. Do not be complacent with your rankings of them and your thoughts of them. There are guys that could turn the corner. I am personally doing that a little bit with Mike McCarthy, a guy that I dogged quite a bit when he was with the Green Bay Packers later on and last year as well. Feel like he's doing a much better job this season with the Dallas Cowboys. But a man that always does a terrific job, that'd be you, David Baker. You're the 2020 Westgate SuperContest champion, a professional poker player, and a man that does amazing work. Thank you so much for joining me in studio.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and see you next Sunday.
David does amazing work. And coming next, let's take a look at more of those NFL games for this upcoming week here on VSiN, Esports Betting Network.
Hey, it's Gil Alexander from VSiN. Every Monday during the football season, we do something really special on my show, A Numbers Game. Chrissy Andrews, the director of the South Point